Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when you're tuning in. Thanks for joining me, classmates, professor, and anyone else that might be listening to my speech today. Today I'd like to give my informative speech. Before I begin, I'd like to show you a few images. This is the headline of Sandy Hook Elementary School Massacre. Aurora, Colorado. The shooting at the theater. And of course, the infamous Columbine High School. You see, all these things have something in common. No, I'm not giving a speech about gun control. Today I'm talking about mental illnesses. You see, each of those shooters were believed to have some form of undiagnosed mental illness. When you see things like this in the news, it's no surprise that there's this stigma around mental illness. People tend to be afraid of those that are mentally ill, are unsure of them, and tend to be unsure of themselves and how to handle being around someone like that. Leading off of that, I'd like to put you in a situation, if you've never been in it. Imagine a friend or a loved one approaches you and says that they're seeing a therapist or a counselor or a psychologist, or they're taking some sort of mental medication. How do you react? What do you say? Are you nervous or afraid? Are you concerned for them, for your own well-being? All of these might be normal reactions based on the stigma that's been created. You see, today I'd like to speak to you to inform you a little more about mental illnesses. Hopefully eliminate the stigma by talking to you about the prevalence, teaching you about some of the various types of mental illnesses, their causes, the different risk factors associated with them, and the various treatments that are available. You see, I believe by learning more, we can eliminate the stigma and help improve the prevalence of them. Speaking of, you see, I had always knew that mental illnesses were relatively prevalent. I knew that many people often suffer from a mental illness, and you do see it pretty common, but I didn't know the exact numbers. So I went on to the National Alliance of Mental Illnesses website and looked at some statistics, and they're quite appalling. 1 in 5 U.S. adults will deal with a mental illness in their lifetime. 1 in 25 U.S. adults will deal with a mental illness so severe that it impedes their daily living. 1 in 5 children from the ages of 13 to 18 will also deal with a severe mental illness. 50% of all mental illnesses present by the age of 14. 75 are noticeable by the age of 24. This is concerning, especially for many of us in this class, as I know that we are right around those age ranges. That's why we have to be ever vigilant, watching out. Despite these numbers, I never really thought it could happen to me. I never really thought that I'd deal with it in a family member or a close one. But as life drew on, I found that I had a cousin with autism. I noticed a long line of depression on my dad's side, a long line of anxiety on my mother's side. Again, still despite this, I never thought I'd actually have to directly deal with any form of a mental illness until I woke in an inpatient hospital after overdosing on sleeping medications. You see, I had anxiety and depression, and I was denying it for many years because of the stigma surrounding it. I believed that I was fine and I could handle it myself, until eventually I hit too far of a rock bottom and I needed help. Thankfully, while I was in there, I found the right medications. I was given coping skills. I sought out therapy, and I made sure to meet and talk with the right people. Because of it, I'm better. You see, I also believe that all of you at some point, regardless of your profession or where you choose to live, will deal with a mental illness in your lifetime, whether it's you or it's a loved one. The numbers are just too high to deny that. That's why we have to be aware of this stigma. You see, Christina Hibbert, a psychiatrist, she's associated with the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and she reported online on their website that nearly 60% of diagnosed adults with mental illnesses don't seek treatment. Additionally, 50% of U.S. children that are also diagnosed also don't receive treatment. This is all because of this stigma. There's also the third leading cause of adults to be hospitalized in the U.S. It's the third leading cause, suicide is the third leading cause of death for children 10 to 14. And it's the second leading cause of children to die from the ages of 15 to 24. You see, those with mental illnesses tend to die 25 years younger than their counterparts. And also, around 20 U.S. veterans every day die from suicide. This is all because people aren't seeking treatment. They either think they don't need it, or they don't want people to know that they need it. They don't want to give in to the stigma and be labeled. Similarly, people want to know the causes. They want to know how to avoid it. How can they prevent it and cure it on their own? It can't be. You see, it's never one thing that you do or a singular thing that happens. But Mayo Clinic lays it out pretty clear that there's three main causes of mental illnesses. First is inherited traits. You see, you tend to have a susceptibility imposed in your genes, so you can thank mom and dad for the chance of developing a mental illness, and then it's usually triggered by some sort of life stressor or traumatic event. Third is environmental exposure before birth. See, as a fetus, you can be exposed to stress or drugs or toxins. This can impede development and lead to a mental illness. The third is brain chemistry. This one you may have heard of. It's pretty common for neural networks, brain chemicals known as neurotransmitters, to be disrupted. They're not flowing in the right amounts in the right places, and this can lead to a mental illness. This is commonly seen in depression and anxiety. In addition to these causes, there's various risk factors that can increase the chance of you seeing a mental illness develop in yourself or others. Again, there are blood relatives because of inherited traits through genes. And there's stressful life events, traumatic events like car crashes, abuse, death of a loved one. There's also some less commonly known ones, like having a chronic medical condition. This can often fall down into a mental illness. Brain damage is pretty common, which is also related to trauma. There's also alcohol and drug abuse. This dependency on the alcohol and drugs can eventually lead to a mental illness. Finally, having another mental illness can also link to a further mental illness. You see, sometimes this disruptive pattern of thinking and behaving can avalanche down into multiple disorders. You see, it's important that when you're watching for these risk factors and knowing the causes, you also acknowledge the different types of mental illnesses. Because not everybody presents the same. You may have heard of the more common ones, like ADHD, anxiety disorders, or bipolar disorder. But what about the less common ones? What about autism? This one is where somebody has trouble communicating and socializing. What about dissociative disorders? This is a whole spectrum of disorders that affects memory and self-perception, or psychosis, where someone has a hard time perceiving reality. There's also schizoaffective disorder. You may have heard of schizophrenia. Schizoaffective disorder presents much of the same things as schizophrenia, like delusions and hallucinations, but it's also combined with a mood disorder, like mania or depression. Recognizing these, and then also looking for common signs or symptoms, will make you an advocate for your loved ones or for yourself to help protect against your mental illness decline or the loved one. It's important you watch for the really common signs or symptoms: excessive worry, anger, sadness, extreme mood swings or social awkwardness and isolation, usually by choice, dramatic changes in eating habits that might signal an eating disorder. I'm not talking choosing the salad over the pizza. I mean severe things like purging, binging, starvation. And also any kind of other distorted thought or behavior, any thoughts or mentions of suicide. These are real warning signs that you need to keep an eye out for. You are the front line of mental illness. If any of these things seem common, or you notice them in yourself or a loved one, you need to make sure that you or a loved one seeks help immediately. If you see these warning signs, it's important you know your potential treatment options. So that way you know what the best options are for you or your loved one, for the best path to health. Everyone knows the most common. Medications are very common. Prozac is a very common antidepressant, but there are other options. Social support is a huge one. If you yourself have a mental illness, it's important you seek out friends and loved ones to keep around. or if your loved one or a friend has a mental illness, you need to be their support. You need to make sure that you help them out and help them seek the proper treatment. In addition, there's counseling and therapy. You see, I think this is good for anyone. Counseling and therapy helps you work through your different ideas, your thoughts, your distorted patterns and behaviors, helps you work through different problems in life. I think anyone could benefit from this. Another really lesser known but really effective treatment is exercise. Exercise helps boost your self-esteem, can improve mood, has many different physical aspects that are beneficial. You see, it can be combined with any other form of treatment. It's cheap, it can be done just about anywhere. It's often overlooked, so don't forget about exercise. So, coming back to the stigma, I'd like to note a journal I found, an academic journal by Jonathan M. Metzl, published in AMJ Public Health, titled Mental Illness, Mass Shootings, and the Politics of American Firearms. You see, he explained that Adam Lanza, James Holmes, and Eric Harris, the 3 shooters in the articles I showed you earlier, were all believed to have mental illnesses. He also reports that this staggering statistic that since 1970, 60% of mass shootings were believed to be caused by somebody with a mental illness. It's no doubt that the stigma is starting to be created, and everybody is afraid of those with mental illnesses. But he goes on to explain that it's often misunderstood, and this is why people aren't receiving treatment. It's important that we understand a surprising statistic like one given by Jonathan later, that around 4% of all violence in the United States, only 4%, is caused by those with mental illnesses. See, this is so often misunderstood. People think that many of those with mental illnesses are susceptible to lashing out, but instead, a mental illness tends to be self-destructive. Those with schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, they tend to withdraw, isolate themselves, can lead to self-destruction and their own suffering and pain. And that's why others need to be their supports. In summary, I'd like to recap that we talked about how prevalent these are. I truly believe that regardless of your profession, where you choose to live in the future, what you choose to do with your life, you'll encounter a mental illness in yourself or a loved one at some point. Don't forget that there's many warning signs to keep an eye out for. Generally, any kind of disturbed or distorted thought or behavior is often a warning sign. And remember that there's nothing that can be absolutely preventable with a mental illness. And there's various causes, most that you can't contribute to, most you can't change. Finally, there's many different treatments that you can choose from. Making sure that you or your loved one is receiving the treatment that's most beneficial is really important, that you get to be the advocate for their health and yours. Thank you for listening. I hope you learned a few things about mental illness. And remember that you are the one that's on the front lines of mental illness. Only you can help end the stigma, make sure people are receiving the treatments that they deserve. Thank you.